Everyone knows that sequels suck.
By definition alone, they're inferior films.
Or do they?
What I love about sequels is the characters are all established. We know who they are. So let's just get into it.
As great as Anthony Perkins is in Psycho, I think he's even better in Psycho 2.
I'm Norman Bates.
Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is my favorite one.
So good. It's so good.
It wasn't just scary, it was funny.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV.
I think people know when they see the Chucky movie, you know what you're going to get.
I love the Purge franchise. You want to understand how this even all started.
Gremlins 2, I think, might possibly be the best sequel of all time.
It takes everything that you love about the first film and it cranks it up to a whole other level.
Horror movie sequels do not suck. Horror movie sequels are actually fantastic, and sometimes they're even better than the originals.
Horror sequels. They can be fun. But usually, they're a long way from being great.
It's really hard to pull off a good horror sequel. There's so many of them that suck. But then there are a few that actually really don't suck. And it's all the more impressive when you can go from Alien, which is one of the most iconic movies in cinema, and come out with Aliens.
Sometimes, sequels fall far short of the original. And sometimes, they amp up the body count and are even better. The tradition of the great horror sequel goes all the way back to James Whale's Bride of Frankenstein.
I always loved Bride of Frankenstein, you know, just the fact that it picks up right where the original movie left off, I think really has a lot of power. Like, wait a minute, so the windmill burns down, and then what happens? So you feel like you're getting a continuing saga.
You can use a sequel to enhance and build on something that you did in the first one.
Groovy.
You can take it in a different direction. There's a million things you can do if you've got some good piece of material that warrants being revisited.
Got to remain logical.
I like making sequels because I don't have to explain anything. I can just start from the get-go and do some new adventure.
For a sequel that delivers on all levels, there's no better example than the greatest slasher sequel of all time.
Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, is like the peak of the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
It's just jam-packed with cool stuff.
There's certain films that it's almost like the second movie wasn't so great or wasn't as good as the first one, and then the third one reinvents the franchise and becomes a masterpiece.
Well, you're right. No, Dream Warriors managed to click into the mythology of the first one.
Freddy's home.
In a way that was exciting for audiences, but it also seemed on a slightly bigger canvas. You were surprised by the bigness and the sense of fun.
For Dream Warriors, series creator Wes Craven returned as producer and co-writer. He brought back his beloved heroine, Nancy Thompson.
Oh my God.
I think Wes really believed that Nancy was kind of the best aspect that we all have inside of us, that she is the kind of person who faces fear head on and doesn't avoid the thing that's endangering their lives, but just go straight at it.
Kruger's back.
Fred Krueger is dead.
I loved that they brought her back. I loved how they brought her back and that she was there to sort of help the children, and in a sense, she's there to save them.
Now a grad student studying dream psychology,
I have had some experience with pattern nightmares.
Nancy comes home to help a new generation of teens targeted by the dream killer, Freddy Krueger. The Elm Street parents, clueless as ever, have put the tormented teens in a mental institution.
They're killing us!
they have a secret weapon. Newcomer Kristen, played by Patricia Arquette, has the power to bring people into her dreams.
Nancy.
For the first time, Freddy's victims have safety in numbers. Led by Nancy, they form a gang of freedom fighters.
They're able to take on these like superhero personas in their dreams and fight back against Freddy. So like one of them becomes this like super cool punk chick.
Let's dance.
The kid who's in the wheelchair is like able to walk. It's about wish fulfillment as well as, you know, being murdered.
But the teens soon discover Freddy has his own bag of new tricks.
Freddy is in the imagination of the person he's haunting. And the imagination is larger than life. It's kicked up. It's surreal.
There's a massive worm-like creature that is gruesome, but also perverted. And I think that's just what makes it all the better. It's horror, like, be weird.
This film has some of the more spectacular and memorable deaths.
The scene where the guy's veins are ripped out, with Freddy playing him like a little puppet and then slicing those veins and he falls to his death. That's an amazing kill.
The thing that made Nightmare on Elm Street 3 stick out so much is that it was the first entry into fun Freddy before he became silly Freddy. So he was still scary in this, but having a bit more time to quip.
What a rush. There were scenes in 3 where I would be really bad, really evil. And then they would add a one-liner.
Sorry, kid. I don't believe in fairy tales.
That all of a sudden becomes scarier of this guy, just like, not only is he gonna kill you, but he's gonna have a little too much fun doing it.
I altered one line to play a little better as Freddy, and it's become a fan favorite. Welcome to prime time, bitch. Wes would tell you that he's a little upset with the exploitation of the humorous part of Freddy's personality, and I back him on that. But Wes is responsible for that. Wes created a character that cracked wise.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
But the fans love that, and that's one reason we exploited the humor so much, is because the fans were just crazy for Freddy's personality.
Great sequels make bold choices. Nightmare 3 saves its biggest shock for last.
It's so heartbreaking because he tricks Nancy after he's already wreaked havoc on her dad in the real world, and he re-enters the dream world in the form of her dad, and he lulls her into this state of like comfort and familiarity.
I'll always love you.
And then Freddy Krueger's there again. He'll get ya.
Nancy dying in part 3 was hard to take. I mean, she was the OG. So you never want the OG to be killed off, but I didn't see it coming. I thought for sure Nancy would never die.
I think that's something that the fans needed and the story needed, and I think that bringing her back and bringing that story full circle helped make Freddy Krueger who he is today.
Some sequels reinvent the franchise, and some dig even deeper into the formula.
It's happening again, isn't it?
Hello?
For a sequel to be great, you have to give the audience what they're expecting, just not in the way they think they're gonna get it. You gotta be like a magician. You know the trick's coming, I'm telling you the trick's coming, I'm telling you the trick's coming, and then you still do it, and they go, wow, I didn't see that coming.
After the massive success of Scream, the pressure was on director Wes Craven and writer Kevin Williamson to come up with another magic trick.
How do you make a sequel to a horror movie that's about horror movies? That's a film commenting on itself, essentially, all the way through. And the answer is, of course, you make a sequel that's about sequels to horror movies.
Sequels suck. No, please. By definition alone, they're inferior films.
So it does a good job of honoring the first movie, but also having its own identity, making fun of sequels.
It's been 2 years since the Woodsboro murders. Neve Campbell returns as Sidney Prescott, now in college.
Hello.
Hello, Sydney.
Sydney really starts the movie with some post-traumatic stress.
Who is this?
You tell me.
Corey Gill.
Sydney seems to be coping until a sneak preview of Stab, a movie based on the events of the first Scream, ends when someone dressed as Ghostface goes on a killing spree.
One of the things I think horror does really well is when an old nightmare comes back. And it comes back in a worse way. And that's what happens to Sydney.
The 2 Windsor College students were murdered last night during a sneak preview of the new movie Stab.
To survive, Sydney and her friends have to ask, what would the killer in a sequel do?
In Scream, they've set out the rules, how to survive a horror movie. Well, by Scream 2, there are rules for sequels. The kills are more elaborate. The body count is always bigger. You never assume the killer is dead.
Why don't you show your face, you coward?
My pleasure. The return of Ghostface throws the audience off balance. The film disorients even more by intercutting pieces of Stab, perhaps the first ever remake inside of a sequel.
The Stab franchise comes into its own in this film. So Scream 2 gets to comment on, the history not only of slasher films and that, but its own legacy. Because you get a recreation of the original Scream in there that's hysterically funny.
I think it's me.
No.
Sid, I didn't do it. I'm innocent.
I know.
So it becomes this strange sort of Hall of Mirrors thing.
I've been going through a lot lately, Billy. Someone tried to kill me.
I know. Sid, I think you need to just move on. I mean, when my mom left, my dad accepted it.
Yeah, your mom left town. She's not lying in a coffin somewhere.
Okay.
My mom's dead and she's never coming back.
So tell us about this part you're getting rave reviews for.
Well, I play this young girl, Sydney Prescott.
Scream 1, my agent sent me the script, and I got to the part where they were like, they might make a movie of your life. And she's like, yeah.
With my luck, they'd cast Tori Spelling.
And I was like, oh. But because she says that when they make Scream 2, they were like, oh, we'll cast Tori Spelling, which was kind of brilliant. I was like, I'm in, perfect.
But beneath the self-aware jokes,
When did she start smoking? Ever since those nude pictures on the internet.
It was just my head. It was Jennifer Aniston's body.
Scream 2 asks, what is the real emotional impact on slasher film characters who make it to the sequel?
Look, Sid, if there is some freaked out psycho trying to follow in Billy Loomis's footsteps, they're probably already in your life.
As Neve Campbell's character learns about life, we're learning with her. And part 2 is, guess what? It's not over. You thought it was over? You thought only one bad thing would happen to you? No, things can get much worse. This horrible thing happened, and you have to deal with that trauma forever.
I don't want to see you get hurt.
She can't trust anyone around her. That's a big theme in these movies. Who can you trust? Because you gotta know the killer.
I need to be alone right now, okay?
Sydney goes up against Ghostface again, but as we know, the original killers are no more. So we have no idea who it could possibly be. Could it be Gail Weathers trying to get another book deal? Could it be Dewey? Does he really have that limp? Is he faking it?
You have a point.
I think that was the main point of part 2. It was removing all trust so that the audience is just completely nervous and on edge, trying to figure out what's going on.
The twist-filled climax reveals the Ghostfaces are 2 new characters. A psychopathic film student.
I'm gonna blame the movies.
And the mother of the murderer Sydney defeated in the original film.
Mrs. Loomis?
You killed my son.
The killer's identity has a purpose to deepen the series' exploration of the nature of violence.
Scream 1 basically asks the question, if you can't blame the movies, who can you blame?
Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
Scream 2 suggested who you can blame. And look who the killer was. It was the mother. So Scream 2, in a weird way, is saying we can blame the parents. Bad parenting creates psychos.
And it sets up for the other sequels. Now you know it can be anybody.
Another way to make an old franchise new again is to turn the clock back to the very beginning.
It's fire, y'all!
This is not a test.
This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge.
2013 saw the release of The Purge, a film about a near-future America in which all violent crime is legal for 12 hours. The violence and brutality of The Purge was intended to reflect the rising tensions writer-director James DeMonaco and his collaborators saw growing in America.
Working in the horror genre allows you to not necessarily explore themes that are different than would be in a drama, but it allows those themes to reach a much broader audience. Purge is a great example.
Did you hear what I said? No more killing tonight!
I think this country has gone off the rails with its relationship to guns, and The Purge is about, if that keeps going, where we might wind up, kind of a cautionary tale.
It's that hard to understand.
The Purge was an enormous success, so inevitably, sequels followed. For the fourth film in the franchise, DeMonaco decided to explore the origins of Purge Night and turn the focus from the privileged to the poor. He brought in Gerard McMurray to direct.
You can't purge me, man. I purge you.
It was centered around these inner city communities, which was very heavily within our black communities. You needed a black filmmaker, and Gerard was able to really bring home the honesty and the truth.
What they're doing to us, what they're doing to this country, I am worried about this country.
The result was The First Purge, an action horror film that's also a scathing indictment of race, class, and power in America.
The American dream is dead. We will do whatever it takes to let you dream again.
In the near future, the NFFA, America's neo-fascist ruling party, runs a test of The Purge in the New York borough of Staten Island.
Staten Island, the chosen site, has become the focus for the entire world.
The FFA offers money to people who need it, and this is how they incentivize murder.
The benefit of acting violently without worry of consequence, that's a freeing violence.
They have their reasoning for it, which is, you know, if we give one night of access and freedom to commit any crime you want to do, then that would lower the crime rate for the rest of the year. That's what they say.
This experiment really happening, Nye?
Community activist Naya is against The Purge, but her younger brother Isaiah sees it as a way out of poverty.
Yeah, I think Isaiah's anger is relatable to everyone. I think everyone feels, you know, a responsibility to feed, look after their family, and the frustration of the opportunity that might not be there.
The sister wants to help her community survive and learn some unsettling truths along the way.
Naya discovers that this is deeply rooted in something bigger than just a crime rate. This is rooted in classism, racism.
You really think these regular folk gonna pop each other like gangsters when the time comes? Yeah. People pissed, they ain't got no money.
But at least at the beginning, it's not all darkness.
What would black people do when it comes to The Purge, right? Like, we're gonna have a party, we're gonna be out on the estate, we're gonna be doing what we're doing, we're gonna be having some fun, and it's a purge party.
There's no law. We can have a street party all night long and nobody will stop it. That's kind of what I think would really happen if there were a purge.
Some kind of block party.
The FFA saw that. They were confused.
Parties?
They're watching, like, why are they just having fun? We mean business.
But of course, in the film, and also maybe this would also really happen, people came from outside of this community and they're wearing Klan outfits and they're wearing neo-Nazi outfits.
By the end, a ruthless drug dealer, who in virtually any other movie would be a villain, almost single-handedly fights off the government assassins.
You know, he's the community thug, so to speak, who has to sort of rise up and fight off these outsiders who have literally flooded this poor community to try to just kill as many black and brown people as they can. And it's tough to watch.
That's the truth. What do we do? And how are we supposed to remain optimistic? Which they do, which is a beautiful ending. It's very optimistic, and we're going to fight this thing. But honestly, where do you go after that moment?
What do we do now?
Now, we fight. When I spoke to a lot of my friends about it, the first purge felt the most truest to real life. And people felt like, yo, wow, this feels like it could actually happen. And if we don't actually come together as a people, then nothing's going to change.
It's over?
For now.
There is another way to breathe life into a horror sequel.
Awake, awake, awake!
Go for the laughs.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play? Hey, wanna play? Hi, I'm your friend to the end.
What do you do when your iconic horror franchise
And I'm your friend to the end. Ha ha ha.
feels tapped out?
There had been 3 Chucky movies, Child's Play 1, 2, and 3. But Child's Play 3 was not very successful.
You got me. I'm bad.
And I felt that we had fallen into a rut of kind of remaking the same movie. And that was something I didn't want to do again.
So Chucky creator Don Mancini threw away the slasher formula and went in a very different direction. Horror comedy. The result was Bride of Chucky.
I felt that if we embraced the absurdity inherent in the premise of a 2-foot killer doll who swears and wields a knife and chases you down and kills you, we could revive the franchise.
Bride of Chucky introduces Tiffany, girlfriend of the serial killer trapped in Chucky's body.
Well, hello, Dolly.
She's determined to bring her lover back to life, and she will stop at nothing to get her way.
Awake!
In a stroke of genius, Jennifer Tilly was cast opposite Brad Dourif, the voice of Chucky.
She's the perfect person for this in so many ways. She's an Oscar nominee, just as Brad Dourif is. She has incredible comedic charisma, physical beauty, sexiness, and a wonderful voice.
Thanks, sweet face. I owe you one.
Tiffany has a certain insouciance that people are attracted to. I mean, she's just like super cool girl, you know. She just doesn't give a
Let me in, huh? I'll catch my death out here.
Promises, promises.
But she's also a dichotomy because she loves Martha Stewart. She likes to make Swedish meatballs and chocolate chip cookies.
Who the is Martha Stewart?
My idol?
To be Chucky's soulmate, of course, she had to be a remorseless killer. But on the other hand, she's also very sentimental and romantic and kind of sweet.
We belong dead.
That's not Chucky at all. So it created a combustible relationship.
Tiffany resurrects Chucky, but their reunion quickly turns sour. After a fatal lover's quarrel, Tiffany's spirit is also trapped in plastic.
You son of a bitch! What have you done to me?
When she suddenly finds herself in a doll's body, she's mad, I mean, but she doesn't fall into depression. She gets out the hair dye and the black nail polish and tries to approximate a look that she is comfortable with.
To regain human form, the couple needs to get across the country to steal a magical amulet. They hitch a ride with 2 unsuspecting teenage runaways. A road trip that quickly turns into a bloodbath.
There is so much more gore in this movie than the other films.
It's a measure of how much respect Don has for you if he kills you in a really horrible way.
No!
Killing together helps Chucky and Tiffany revive their love and lust.
All couples have something that brings them together in the first place. In Chucky and Tiffany's case, of course, it's murder and sex.
Well, at least you haven't forgotten how to show a girl a good time.
So they have their honeymoon period, which climaxes in their big night in Niagara Falls.
One of the bloodiest scenes in the movie leads into one of the most strange and ridiculous scenes in the whole film, which is when they're in the love motel and that couple's in the bed. Tiffany has the champagne bottle and throws it up into the mirror, and it just shatters into hundreds of pieces and impales them on the water bed, and blood and water explodes everywhere, which then leads into a very bizarre sex scene, which is so weird, but so fantastic, but again, really weird.
We were the first people to do doll sex. After that, South Park did a movie where they had doll sex. Our doll sex, I thought, was a little bit more charming.
But like many love stories, this one takes a tragic turn.
She so wants to be loved by Chucky and does so much stuff for Chucky, like cooking and making his favorite dish and trying to make him happy. And he does a thing where he's critical or he puts her down, and then every once in a while she snaps.
Those dishes aren't gonna wash themselves, you know.
The Tiffany character is an abused woman. You know, she's an abused spouse. The movie's throwing in its sympathies with the woman victim.
I feel like Bride of Chucky is a romantic tragedy because it's almost Romeo and Juliet. It's almost like a love that was never meant to be.
I love you, Chucky. We belong together forever.
And at the end, she turns the tables on her abuser.
We belong dead. Goodbye, darling. I'll see you in hell.
Following up a hit is difficult. Now imagine making a sequel to an all-time horror classic. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock directed one of the most famous and influential films of all time, Psycho.
We all go a little mad sometimes, haven't you?
23 years later came the sequel no one asked for, Psycho 2.
By the 80s, Hitchcock was treated like some sort of cinematic saint. So the idea of remaking a Hitchcock film,
The idea of sequelizing a Hitchcock icon was unthinkable.
people talked about it like sacrilege.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound uncaring.
What do you know about caring?
But Psycho 2 proved everyone wrong. Richard Franklin, director of the Australian thriller Road Games, was convinced he could make a sequel that paid tribute to the original, but was strong enough to stand on its own. Franklin hired Tom Holland, another Hitchcock disciple, to write the screenplay.
I was desperate for a job, and I thought, well, that's really the end of my career, because you just knew that the critics were going to savage you for having the temerity to do it.
Holland and Franklin knew that they couldn't give Psycho the sequel it deserved without one essential element.
The only way that we could do it was to get Tony Perkins back as Norman Bates. Tony had felt that the Norman Bates was a curse, and so he didn't want to do a sequel. So I had to figure out how to write a script that would be so terrific for the actor that he'd have to do it. And so it was how to give him a character arc, how to make it into an acting piece. And that's how I came up with, well, you just ask logically, if it's 22 years later, which was the time it had been since the original, where would Norman have been?
The film opens as Norman Bates is released from a mental facility and returns home. His doctor says he is cured. Others have their doubts. Norman's redemption is threatened by a vengeful figure from his past, Lila Loomis, the sister of the woman Norman killed in the shower. Once again, Lila is played by Vera Miles.
When he murders again, you will be directly responsible.
I think we identify with Norman in a different way in Psycho 2 than we did in Psycho 1. Psycho 2 is about, a misfit trying to find his way back to the world.
Can I help you?
I'm Norman Bates, the new cook's helper.
Norman gets a job at a diner and begins a relationship with a sympathetic coworker, Mary, played by Meg Tilly. They move in together.
Is this the room where you had your troubles?
One of them, yeah.
Well, I don't know what happened to you in the past, Norman, but you're never going to get over it, not unless you face it.
Then he starts getting messages from Mother. Is Norman back to his old ways, or is someone trying to frame him?
I'm becoming confused again.
You're rooting for Norman to keep it together. You're rooting for Norman to be sane, to be happy. And now you don't want any of the horror stuff to happen.
To stay true to Hitchcock's style while updating it for 1983, Richard Franklin hired cinematographer Dean Cundy, then known for Halloween and The Thing.
Originally, we wanted to do it in black and white so that it looked like the original. But Universal was pretty adamant. No black and white. Richard was very, very specific about how he wanted to, make sure that visually our version was a continuation, nothing unusual. And to me, that was a great sort of challenge, but fun thing to look at.
The filmmakers also modernized the sequel with graphic violence Hitchcock wouldn't have been allowed to show in 1960.
This is very post-Friday the 13th, post-Halloween, and so you do get some nods to that. You get Dennis Franz, for example, getting his face slashed, which is kind of a full-color version of what happens to Martin Balsam in the original one, but, you're seeing color makes a big difference, obviously.
Psycho 2 ends with a series of twists that would make Hitchcock proud.
Why did you lie to the sheriff and say Bates was with you this afternoon?
Mother.
The Meg Tilly character is the daughter of Vera Miles. They start to torture him and drive him mad. And then Mary, who's wormed her way into living in the house with Norman, starts to feel sorry for Norman.
I've been to all your meetings. I've done everything you've asked me for years, but I am not going to hurt Norman anymore.
And she realizes that Norman really is a good person at that moment and trying to hold on to his sanity.
Norman, do you recognize me? It's me, your mother.
And eventually, it costs her her life because Norman has gone crazy.
Let me help you. You killed them all!
This is why the sequel doesn't suck, is because the ending makes sense. Typically, in good sequels, the rules of that movie then change what happened in the first movie. Here in Psycho 2, you find out that Norman's mother really wasn't his mother.
So, are you really my mother?
And that his real mother is still around.
The woman you thought was your mother was my sister.
And she's the one that's been killing everybody, punishing them for what they did to Norman, putting him away. And he whacks her over the head with a shovel. Then he's back to being Norman Bates again. He carries her up the stairs, and you hear that creepy voice again.
I'm not sleepy. Put me in my chair.
Yes, Mother.
So the arc of the movie is really Norman losing his mind a second time. And the irony is, he ends up at the end of the movie as crazy as a loon, and nobody knows it. It's a tragedy in a way.
Don't let them take me back to the institution.
Anthony Perkins is even better. As great as he is in Psycho, I think he's even better in Psycho 2. I think it's one of the great lead performances in any horror film ever made.
You can't make me kill her.
You don't know the effect that a film's gonna have. I went to a dinner, 7 or 8 years ago with all the big horror directors, and they voted Psycho 2 the best horror sequel ever.
What do you call a sequel that ups the ante on everything in the original, then gleefully tears it apart? Gremlins 2, The New Batch. In 1984, the horror comedy Gremlins was set loose on the world. It was a critical and financial success. Warner Brothers wanted a sequel. Director Joe Dante did not.
When I was offered the opportunity to make a sequel to Gremlins 1, I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm tired. I just did this Gremlins movie. We had to make it up on the fly. We had to invent the technology. I'm exhausted. I'm sick of Gremlins. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Good luck.
6 years later, they made Dante an offer he could not refuse.
They said, we really want this picture, and we want it enough to let you do whatever you want. So I have never gotten an offer like that before or since, and I said, okay.
Dante and screenwriter Charles Haas turned Gremlins 2 into a monster movie imbued with the establishment-baiting spirit of classic Warner Brothers cartoons.
Might as well just start the movie. Roll 'em!
Gremlins 2 seems like, in the most glorious way possible, a filmmaker biting the hand that feeds him.
Most sequels continue a story by expanding on the original premise. Gremlins 2 took the premise and shredded it.
Are you a fan of Gremlins 2, The New Batch?
I think Joe Dante became a director so he could do Gremlins 2. There always is a little bit of a Mad Magazine parody of his own movie running in the margin of a Joe Dante film. And with Gremlins 2, he was able to do a Mad Magazine takeoff on the first Gremlins for the entire movie, for the length of the movie.
Gremlins 2 trades the small-town setting of the first film for a Manhattan office tower, where returning stars Phoebe Cates and Zach Galligan once again become entangled with the lovable Mogwai Gizmo.
Cute, isn't it?
Inevitably, Gizmo gets wet. Spawning a legion of evil gremlins who run riot through a building that's a microcosm of American society in the early 1990s.
Now, this week we have our special salute to luncheon meat.
The cultural satire goes hand in hand with a satire of the movie itself.
Gremlins 2 is sort of a movie about how there didn't need to be a sequel to Gremlins. I didn't expect that there would ever be a sequel to Gremlins, and much less that I would be making it. So I decided to make a movie about sequels. And what are they worth?
When they start goofing on every aspect of the original premise in the movie, in the sequel, that was hysterical about, okay, don't eat after midnight.
What if they're eating in an airplane and they cross a time zone? I mean, it's always midnight somewhere.
Well, once Phoebe Cates started parodying the Santa Claus story, then you knew.
The Phoebe Cates parodying the Santa Claus monologue.
Something terrible happened to me one year on Lincoln's birthday.
I didn't know you were allowed to do that. I was like, are you allowed to make fun of your own movie?
This man with this
Honey,
beard and a hat looked just like Abe Lincoln.
Honey, I really don't think
Except
we've
for
got
the
time for
raincoat.
this now, you know?
It made fun of the first movie. It made fun of the concept of sequels.
This is worse than the first one.
We just show these movies, madam. We don't make them.
It made fun of capitalism.
I look at him, you know what I see? Dolls with suction cups staring out car windows.
Joe Dante just seemingly took everything he loved and then used it to make fun of everything he hated.
All the great horror movies are in black and white. Mr. Clamp only likes color.
It's got so many clever and original ideas, including having a film critic give the first film a bad review again in the second film before I'm killed by the gremlins.
Wait a minute! I'm just kidding! Ow! A 10! It's a...
I'm sure some people in the audience are watching that movie with their popcorn in their hand thinking, what is happening?
Gremlins 2 also topped the first film by bringing in special effects maven Rick Baker to create a diverse new group of monsters.
It's eating my vegetable medley.
The mutant products of Gremlins running amok in a genetics lab.
There is a phenomenal Key and Peele sketch about the pitching of Gremlins 2 that's so funny.
What if we did this? Everybody here gets to design their own gremlin.
They weren't just like cute and fluffy and then green.
These were mutated gremlins. So you get spider gremlins, flying gremlins. You got talking gremlins.
Might I have a brief word with you?
You got my favorite. You got the bougie gremlins with big red lips, super incredible dress and wig, and of course, the flashing gremlin with the sick glasses. You got every single gremlin you could want in a movie.
The madness builds until the spectacular finale, when the heroes manage to prevent a gremlin apocalypse.
Gremlins 2 just gets better every time you see it.
Gremlins 2, I think, might possibly be the best sequel of all time.
Probably Gremlins 2 is my most personal movie. Not in that it's personal to me, except that it's my most unfiltered movie. It's nobody looking over my shoulder, telling me what to do. And there's a lot of me in it.
And to this day, there's never been a Gremlins 3, because it feels like Gremlins 2 scorched the earth.
Horror sequels give us a way to return to the worlds that fascinated and frightened us the first time around. We get to see our favorite characters back in action. And we get more of everything. More monsters, more scares, bigger and crazier kills. The best sequels give us what we want. Make the old seem new again.